Well, Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese will warn miners today their exports are at risk if the government continues its inflammatory rhetoric with China. Joining me now is Liberal MP James Paterson. Senator James Paterson. Senator, good to see you this morning. Just before we get into Albanese, as a Victorian, I just want to ask you your reaction today, that the potential for this lockdown to continue for at least another week.
Well, that will be very tough news for Victorians if that is what is confirmed by the state government today. They've suffered under 4 lockdowns, very long lockdowns, and it's had an enormous impact on their mental health and their well-being, let alone the economy and small business. If that's what the medical advice recommends, then I understand and accept that, and I won't quarrel from that, but I will be sad for Victorians who will be suffering yet again.
Do you believe that regional Victoria should be roped off, though, and a ring of steel essentially placed around Melbourne?
Look, that really is a matter for the state government. It certainly seems to me if there's no COVID in regional communities, that the same conditions and restrictions shouldn't apply to them. How the state government then chooses to enforce that is up to them.
OK, now Labor is again calling for more help, more financial help from the Treasurer. It believes that the state government has done enough. What's your response to that?
Look, as a Victorian, I'm very grateful for the $46 billion that federal taxpayers have provided to Victorians throughout the crisis. It's more than 3 times as much as the $13 billion that Victorian government has provided its own citizens to get through the many lockdowns that it has imposed on them. So I don't think any fair accounting can say that federal government has done anything other than provide very generous ongoing support for Victorians. And if there's any further support necessary, then I think it's appropriate that the Victorian government provide that.
OK, so if this extension goes on for another couple of weeks, you still believe that the feds shouldn't chip in anymore?
Well, look, that will be considered by the Cabinet and by the Expenditure Review Committee, no doubt. But I think overwhelmingly the responsibility must lie with the Victorian government. It's the Victorian government that's taken the decision to close down Victoria for the 4th time, and it is the Victorian government that I think bears the main moral and economic responsibility to support Victorians through that.
OK, just onto this speech that Anthony Albanese is going to be giving at the Minerals Council later on today. Senator, part of it reads that Scott Morrison has no long-term strategy to deal with a changing China that is pressing its interests more assertively while finding areas of potential cooperation on trade. That's part of what he wants to say today. What's your reaction to parts of that have been published this morning?
Well, I guess there's 2 possibilities here. Number one, Mr Albanese, whose leadership is under pressure, is exaggerating the differences between the Labor Party and the government on China for partisan political reasons. And if he's doing that, that's very irresponsible because it aids the Chinese Communist Party in its work. It would like nothing more than Australians to be divided. The second possibility is that the Labor Party is actually changing its policy on China and it's walking away from its bipartisan support for the government. And if so, they need to come clean on that today and say exactly which of the list of 14 demands that the Chinese embassy made that they would concede on. Because up until now, all of those issues are issues that the Labor Party has supported the government on, whether it's scrutiny of foreign investment, banning of Huawei from our 5G network, passage of the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme. Now, if they're not going to change any of those fundamental policy drivers that the CCP has identified as a problem in our relationship, then there's no reason to expect that there would be any different relationship under Labor than there has been under the Coalition.
OK. He also says that Scott Morrison's making the grave error of prioritising his domestic political interests over Australia's national interests. What's your reaction to that part?
Well, I think Anthony Albanese needs to look in the mirror here. Everybody knows with Joel Fitzgibbon running around, tearing him down, the divisions that they've got on energy policy, that he's looking for an issue that might unite his party and attacking the government, criticising on the government on China. Perhaps that's his way of getting out of that. But I really think it is unhelpful to exaggerate the differences between us because actually in policy terms, I don't think they're that great, unless, of course, they are planning on announcing new policy today.
Do you believe that drums of war kind of rhetoric does need to be toned down in the future, though?
Well, referring to Mike Pezzullo's speech that did attract a lot of media attention, I mean, essentially what Mike Pezzullo said in slightly more colourful language was what the Defence Strategic Update said last year. And the Prime Minister released that with a speech. And in that update, it said the risks of state-on-state conflict in our region are rising. That's essentially what Mike Pezzullo said. So we do need to be honest with the Australian people about that. That is the assessment of our intelligence and security agencies. That is the assessment of the ADF. We wish it wasn't the case, but it is the case, and so therefore we have to prepare for it, and we have to be honest with the Australian people why we're doing that. We're not spending $270 billion on acquiring new defence capability for no reason. We're doing it because, unfortunately, those risks have increased.
Okay. Liberal Senator James Paterson, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.